Okay, so now I need you to, this brings us to questionnaire number 8. So if you want to take out your self-assessment sheet, where you should have the score for questionnaire number 8, you can now write in the word column there, the name column, gratitude. Okay. Now, the full possible range for this scale was 24 by 168. So 24 lowest, 168 highest. But notice that you've got 4 subscores. You have an A, B, C, and D. And these are going to be more meaningful to you. Now, the range of the subscores run from 6 to 42. 6 to 42. And with each of them, if you have a 30 or higher, that is considered to be high gratitude. With this particular questionnaire, it's best to interpret it by relativity in different categories. And we'll talk more about that after you learn what these categories are. So you have a score for A, B, C, and D, and we're going to start here with A. Okay, so A score is a measure of your gratitude for abundance. Gratitude for things in your life, abundance. Okay. Your B score is your gratitude for those small things in life, like a sunset, for instance. But gratitude for small things, too much, how grateful are you for those small things? How much do you realize how much pleasure that you get out of them in life? And then C is gratitude for aesthetics. This is an interesting one. Aesthetics could be nature, could be any form of art, including music. And then D is your social gratitude. And this is your gratitude for other people in your life. Overall, but especially with an emphasis on how they have helped you. So again, I said we want you to interpret this in light of relativity of your different categories. So which are your highest? Which are your lowest? When I say which are your lowest, I'm talking about which have the most room for improvement, the capacity to increase your happiness in your life. Okay. So if you were to do a journal, a gratitude journal, as a lot of people have in taking Dan Gilbert's advice in increasing their happiness and have found greater happiness in doing this. Some people will do this and they will focus on all 4 categories. In fact, some people will write the 4 down at the top of their journal just to remind themselves every time they go in to try to think of something in each area. Other people like to work on their lowest categories and then see if they can improve gratitude in that area. And the idea here is not to compare ourselves with other people. I mean, remember that is the very best proven way to be unhappy. So if you think of abundance, you might think, well, and you might be true, you might be thinking, I was born in poverty, and you might be true, and you may not have much, but that should make you even more grateful for what you have. So each of these categories can be worked on within your journal to increase it. All right, moving along. Okay. Some really interesting work on self-esteem from the humanistic approach. And this is looking at people who have high self-esteem versus low self-esteem and how they react to negative feedback. This is really interesting. Okay. So how they react to, well, think about it. There are times in life when you're going to get negative feedback. And let's hope we all do, because that's the only way that we can correct ourselves on things and grow, right? So negative feedback is very functional. But how people react to it is very different depending on their level of self-esteem. And if you think about it, any job review, right, any good job review has good stuff and it has bad stuff. So in other words, you should receive praise for what you're doing well, but we all have room to grow, and we should get ideas of how we have room to grow. We should get some negative feedback too. How do you think this differs, though? First off, I want you to think about people who have high self-esteem. Okay, how they study this in the laboratory is they screen for people who have high and low self-esteem. They measure that, screen for them. Okay, bring them in. So we've got a group of high and a group of low that come into the laboratory. And they give them what is called bogus negative feedback. In other words, they have them, at one study, for example, in this set, they had the participants take what they told them was a new kind of intelligence test. And when they got done, if they had been randomly assigned to the bogus negative feedback group, okay, and half of the highs and half of the lows, by the way, were, they would be told that they performed worse than, you know, the average student here at this university. And on the other side, you know, if they were in the group that was randomly chosen to get bogus positive feedback, they were told that they did better than the average student. So that means that all of these people, they didn't even look at how they did on the test, right? The researchers didn't. The feedback they got did not depend on how well that person did on the test. That person doesn't know how well they did. This is how they find out, okay? And that's why it's called bogus negative feedback, okay? And what they found is that, again, I want you to think about this. How do you think high self-esteem people react to negative feedback, okay? And if you thought that, you know, they are relatively unfazed about it, you're correct. They're relatively unfazed. So they keep trying just as hard and they're just as motivated as they were before when they get negative feedback. This is very different, as you might have guessed, with people with low self-esteem who react in a way in which they reduce their efforts and sometimes actually just give up, okay? So this is really important to know. Again, if you think back to the idea of using this information in the workforce like Maslow encourages you to do, supervisors really can benefit by getting to know their employees well enough to know whether they have particularly high or low self-esteem. And for those who have low self-esteem, obviously if you're doing a review and you're a good supervisor, you are always going to start with the positive stuff, unless you don't want this person working for you any longer, right? You're always going to start out with the positive stuff. So the difference here is how much emphasis you're going to give to the negative. You're going to start out with the positive and you're going to end up, you know, also reminding them of the positive before they leave. If these are employees that you certainly want to keep, right, then you're going to do that. But with people who have low self-esteem, they will actually react better if you tell them that negative information, but don't focus, don't dwell on it, don't talk longer than you need to about it, and give more emphasis to the positive. Make sense? All right. Also from the humanistic psychologists, a very interesting self-enhancement bias. And it's called the Lake Wobegon effect. And it's called that because Garrison Keillor has a show called Lake Wobegon. And he always starts his show out by saying, we're going to bring you the news from Lake Wobegon, where all of the women are strong, all of the men are good looking, and all of the children are above average. Okay? And the humor in there, well, a couple components of it. First off, he switches the gender stereotypes, but most of the humor in there is from this line: most of the children are above average, because statistically that is impossible, right? So only approximately 50% of the children can be above average. But this is called oftentimes the Lake Wobegon effect instead of the self-enhancement bias. So I want you to know both names for this. We could refer to it on the test by either name, and also if you are to take like GREs down the road, it can show up in either name. And papers that are published on it appear on, using either one. Okay, but the late Wobegon effect is a tendency that we have to think that we are better than average. And I say better, I mean people have a tendency to think that they're smarter than average, better looking than average, more socially skilled than average, and so on. Okay? Again, it's a statistical impossibility. In fact, about 70% of students think that they are better than the average student. Okay? You might think, well, they just find this in students. Probably after we get older and wiser, that will go away, right? No, they find this in all age groups. And in fact, they've looked across many different professions moving beyond students. And this is a very persistent effect, even across professions. And they even looked at professors, and they found that approximately 70-some% of us think that we profess better than average. Okay? Now, normally when we have biases in life, they are not beneficial. In other words, they don't help us to anticipate things well, to know what to expect. They don't help us to predict the world well, so we don't know how to react as well. This is an exception, though. And we actually find that people who don't show this, remember that only about 70-some% of people do, and people who don't show this actually are more vulnerable to mental health problems over time. Okay. Okay, 2 more important needs. Now, remember that Maslow's needs are important all the way through your life. No matter how old you get, all of those needs will be real needs in your life. And in fact, some of them increase with age. But psychologists have agreed on 2 more very important needs that continue throughout your lifetime. And one of them is the need for solitude. And we're not talking here about a need to be lonely. There's a very big difference between solitude and being lonely. In fact, solitude is the ability to enjoy your time alone, right? So this time with yourself to write or to digest your thoughts, okay? But quality time, you might say, with yourself. First off, Maslow found an exceptionally high need for solitude among exceptionally healthy people. Okay? And he also found many different correlates, many different mental health benefits from a high need for solitude that were correlated with this high need. So people are better psychologically adjusted. They experience less stress. Does that mean they experience less stressful events in life? No, it means they tend to react less with stress. They experience less depression. And the friendships that they do have tend to be closer and warmer. So they don't necessarily have, 1,000 friends on Facebook or even 20, right? But the friendships they do have tend to be true friendships, so closer and warmer. And then very interesting, this is one of those needs that actually really increases with age. So if you don't feel it now, it's likely you will by middle age, and that it will grow and grow as you get older. That real time to dwell inward, you might say. Okay? And when you find your thoughts to be more entertaining than the outside world. Okay? Let's add one more very interesting and important need onto here that psychologists have agreed on, and that is a need for autonomy. A need for autonomy, meaning a freedom of choice, to feel that you have choice in your life, that you have options from which to choose, okay? And think about, how important this is, that it would make this not very long list of needs that are important all the way through our life. This is a very, very important need, and yet if we look at, for instance, nursing homes, even if we look at care homes that aren't at a nursing level, oftentimes so many choices are taken away from people that we take for granted. We take it for granted that we not only get to choose what we eat at a meal, but we get to choose when we have that meal, right? When we decide to engage in it. So many things that we take for granted. And it's a powerful need, okay? Now, when we do talk about the freedom of choice, though, it brings to mind some really interesting research that this picture on the right is referring to on your screen, where you see these grocery shelves where you might get dizzy just looking at this. There is an optimal level of choice. So, and it's certainly not that big fat zero that oftentimes people in nursing homes see in many areas of their life. Okay, it is not a zero, but you can exceed the number. So let me tell you a really interesting, a really fun study that researchers did. Okay, participants were given their choice of either 6 different jams, and they got to keep it, take it, and bring it home, and then they came back and rated how much they liked it. Or they had their choice of 36 different jams, okay? And they were less happy, less satisfied when they had their choice of 36, okay? So there is, sometimes if you pass that half dozen or so mark, it can just get to be overwhelming, and you never know if you really made the right choice. And that, if you study cognitive dissonance, for instance, in psychology, in cognitive psychology, that can really change your mind about how much you like the product. Okay? And then a couple of terms in psychology that are related to this that I want you to be familiar with are satisficers and maximizers. Okay? So people tend, what we call maximizers tend to base their choice on an overload of available factors. Okay, satisficers, and that word actually, psychologists made it, that term, from 2 different words: satisfyingly sufficient. Okay, so satisficers tend to base their choice on the few most important factors. Okay, so people tend to oftentimes be satisficers or maximizers. And it's too bad that they don't have a really high reliability validity scale, or I would have had you take that too. We don't have it yet, but I want you to guess. Who do you think is the most mentally healthy? So we have a mental health correlation here. And the people who tend to be more mentally healthy, are satisficers, of course. So maximizers are kind of overloading themselves and can be less happy with their lives because of that. All right, and learned helplessness. Now, some of you have heard about Seligman's dogs in maybe developmental psychology. Okay. But we're not going to take anything for granted here, so we're going to quickly review that because it's super interesting, and it's the best way to start learning about learned helplessness. And I want you to imagine that you worked in Seligman's lab. He had a lab of dogs, and you were working on the study. Your job would be to, over the period of the study, for instance, you'd come in on a day, and you would see that you would be assigned to take a certain number of dogs out one at a time, okay, and to bring them to this box that Seligman devised. And the box, the sides on the box were high enough that the dog could not jump out, but it was big, okay. It was a big box, and I can't put my hands wide enough or you won't see it on the camera, but we will bring it down into the space. But it was a pretty big box, and it was divided in the center by a lower wall going down the center. So you're going to put the dogs on one side. They can't jump out, but they, of course, could jump over at this lower wall. And half of the time, so you're going to flip a coin, and if it comes to heads, this dog gets put into the box where the entire floor is electrocuted. Okay? And it's certainly not enough to hurt the dogs, to do any like tissue damage or anything like that, but it's very scary, and you probably have all had that feeling before, of at least a mild electrical shock. Hey, it's not pleasant. And so when you put the dog in, again, depending on what group they're in, heads or tails, right? The experimental or control group, in other words, either the entire floor is electrocuted or just the side of the box. But either way, they're going in on this side, right? So they're not going to be happy campers. And what do you think they all do? First thing they do, right over the wall. You guessed that correctly, okay? But think about that. For half of them, it worked. For the other half, it didn't work at all, right? Very interesting, because the next day you would be assigned to take those exact dogs out again. And now to put them all in the one that only has the electricity on the one side. Okay? And so you put them in, and you notice that if they have been in the escapable group before, that they jumped right over that wall. But if they had not, oftentimes they didn't even try. In fact, some of them, they would just stand there, and some of them would actually lay down and just whimper. Okay? Learned helplessness. They learned to be helpless. Okay? And again, we're going to take this all the way to assisted living care homes. That's why we have this picture on the slide. But before we do, you might be saying, well, that's dogs, right? What about human beings? Okay, so human irritating noise study. This is a really interesting study. And what the researchers did was they brought participants into the lab, and they gave them headphones, and they were given problems to solve on the headset, over the headset. But also, when they were given the problem to solve, as soon as they heard the problem, a very irritating noise started playing over the headset. And they were told that as soon as they got the answer right, the irritating noise would go away. If they got the answer right, it would go away, and they would get a breather from it, right? And if not, it would continue. But here's the deal. Half of the participants were given very easy problems to solve, and the other half were given problems that are unsolvable. Okay? So they're hearing that noise all the time, and it's really irritating. You know that noise of fingernails coming down on a chalkboard is kind of like that irritating. Okay? And then very similar to Seligman dog study, they bring these participants back into the lab later, okay, and they give them all easy problems to solve. And what do they find? They find that the group that had the easy problems before, okay, they did a great job. Okay? The other group didn't try very hard, sometimes not at all. Okay? They had learned to be helpless. Humanistic therapists focus on helping their clients learn that they can take control, and learning that they can have an impact and they can change things. Okay? So humanistic psychologists really took this work to heart, especially when working with people who are suffering from depression. Okay? And when we look at learned helplessness applied to elderly homes like nursing homes and even just assisted care homes, wow, not just learned helplessness, but Maslow also. So Maslow in his work and all of his researchers who have followed in his footsteps, Seligman in his work and all the researchers following in his footsteps, have really made a difference and increased the quality of care at these homes, quality of life that people experience in these homes. But we have a long way to go yet. And I'll tell you what, I am relying on your generation to fix a lot of what is wrong in this before I land in one of these, okay? And I want to be able to rely on you. As here's the deal, if you look at Maslow's needs, every single one, you will notice that a lot of homes focus more on just those first bottom two, okay? Physiological needs and safety needs. That's it. And that is something that's called maintenance needs. They're simply needed in order to stay alive, to maintain a living status. They do nothing for your quality of life, okay? So all of those needs from that point on, okay, I want you to think about each one individually and how people might be deprived in even just an assisted living home, okay? And I want you to think about learned helplessness and the idea that not only do people learn to be helpless, but if you don't let them do things like dress themselves even, or put on, style their own hair, or cook a meal, they will forget how to do these things. They won't be able to do them anymore. Okay? Learned helplessness. Okay, applied to elderly homes. And this brings us to an assignment. Not an assignment, this is just something I want you to do. But, like I said, when I come up with these activities, it really, really helps you to solidify this material to actually do it. So what I want you to do is to take all the needs above the maintenance needs. That would be social, self-esteem, cognitive, aesthetic, the need for solitude, and the need for autonomy. So we're going to add those two in, right? And by the way, they wouldn't be in that order. But we're just throwing them on a list here because we want you to go through one at a time. I would like you to think of a creative way that you could increase the quality of life. And I want you to focus on just an assisted care facility. A lot of people are only have a room in an assisted care facility because, for instance, they need somebody to administer their meds. So they might have a problem remembering if they already took them and take them again, or they might have a problem with forgetting to take them. But for very minor reasons like that, a lot of people are there. So these are pretty well functioning people. So I want you to try to think of an idea for each of these needs, okay, of how you could change the policies or what's being offered at an assisted care community. And also, don't forget your homework. So you have 2 chapters to read. And in addition to that, you have 2 more questionnaires to do before you watch our next lecture segments, okay, on the behavioral approach.